picture this, right? It's 1979. You are sitting in this sleek, incredibly intimidating corporate boardroom at Sony.
Oh, wow. Setting the scene. I love it. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here for this deep dive.
So glad to have you. And so you're in this boardroom, and an engineer named Kozo Osone walks in. He takes this really clunky, rectangular metal box and just places it down on the mahogany table.
Right.
It's a cassette deck, but it's been awkwardly miniaturized. And it has these little foam headphones attached to it. And Osone looks at the executives and says, with this, anyone can listen to music anywhere without bothering anyone.
And I could only imagine how well that went over.
Oh, they immediately burst out laughing. I mean, they completely mock it. They tell him no one in their right mind is going to be caught dead wearing headphones in public. It was considered like deeply antisocial back then.
It has a massive taboo.
Exactly. And his boss even points out what seems to be this ultimate, undeniable, fatal flaw. He says, nobody is going to buy a tape deck that cannot record.
Which makes perfect sense on paper.
Right. But here we are. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us because today we are exploring a really fascinating phenomenon found in our source material, an excerpt from Document 8. We are going on a mission to figure out why inferior technology or seemingly weird products so often end up just utterly dominating the market.
It really is the perfect starting point. Because that Sony boardroom scene, it represents this ultimate clash, right? The clash of pure logic versus messy human desire.
Yeah.
I mean, the engineers mocking that prototype, they were completely correct on paper. A tape deck that doesn't record is objectively, functionally inferior.
Right, it's doing less.
Exactly. And wearing headphones in public in 1979 was just not done. The Sony chairman, Akio Morita, he saw the device, and he instantly overruled his entire executive team.
Wait, just like that?
Just like that. And why? Because he reportedly had this deep, entirely personal desire to listen to opera on long international flights.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He made a massive gamble that other people had that exact same latent desire, to carry their own private, invisible musical worlds with them. And, well, he was right.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Morita's gamble flies in the face of everything we are taught about innovation.
It really does.
I mean, the traditional Western playbook is so rigid. You identify a market, you engineer the absolute best technological solution with the fastest specs, you pack it with 1 million features, and then you launch a massive marketing campaign.
Yeah, more features, more power. That's the default.
Right. But what we are seeing here is an entirely different philosophy.
It is. Over the last 50 years, companies in Japan and eventually radical innovators worldwide have just been quietly rewriting the rules of product development. They aren't doing it by relying on superior technical specifications.
So what are they relying on?
They're doing it by focusing intensely on human psychology. They figured out how to directly address the invisible psychological friction that actually stops people from adopting new ideas.
And what's wild is that the Walkman didn't win by having pristine audiophile-level sound fidelity. I mean, from what the source says, the early sound quality was actually pretty mediocre.
Yeah, it really wasn't great.
Right. So people weren't buying it for the tech specs. They were buying it because it was effortless, which completely shifts how we evaluate good technology, doesn't it?
It is a bitter pill for traditional engineers to swallow, for sure. But historically, convenience almost always beats pure technological power.
Always.
To understand the mechanics of this, let's fast forward a bit to the great portable console war of 1989.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Yeah, you had gaming giants like Sega, NEC, and Atari all battling for that incredibly lucrative teenage market, and they were building these absolute powerhouse portable consoles.
Like beasts.
Exactly. We are talking cutting-edge color screens, state-of-the-art processors, backlit displays.
Sounds amazing.
Right. And then you have Nintendo. Nintendo's chief engineer, Gunpei Yokoi, he took the exact opposite approach with the Game Boy.
He really did.
He used this monochrome pea-green LCD screen. He used a last-generation, super slow processor chip. If you evaluate pure specs on paper, the Game Boy should have been laughed out of the room.
I mean, it was essentially a gray brick.
It was great break.
But here's the thing about those competitor consoles with the incredible color screens, they just devoured battery.
Well, absolutely chewed through them.
Right. The Game Boy, precisely because it used what Yokoi called withered technology, it managed to squeeze 40 hours of life out of 4 LA batteries. Compare that to the competitors who were dying after 4 or 5 hours.
Lateral thinking with withered technology.
Yeah.
That was Yokoi's actual design philosophy.
It's brilliant.
By using withered or older proven technology, the Game Boy was incredibly cheap to manufacture. That made it affordable for a kid's allowance. But more importantly, Yokoi understood the psychology of the user.
How so?
Well, he knew about the jobs to be done framework long before it became this Silicon Valley buzzword. Kids weren't hiring a portable console to be a marvel of modern silicon engineering.
Right, they just wanted to play Super Mario Brothers or Pokemon.
Exactly. They were hiring it to stave off boredom in the backseat of a minivan.
And a color screen does not matter if the console dies somewhere in Ohio on a cross-country road trip?
Nope.
The anxiety of a dying battery is a massive psychological friction point.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of something in my daily life, and I think you listening can probably relate to this. The debate between a traditional cast iron skillet and those new $4,000 Bluetooth smart ovens.
Oh, yeah, the smart ovens.
Right. The smart oven has a touch screen. It connects to your Wi-Fi. It has an app that sends you push notifications.
That's basically a computer.
Exactly. But the moment the firmware needs an update or the Wi-Fi drops, you literally cannot roast chicken.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
Whereas the cast iron skillet is heavy, it's low-tech, it's literal centuries-old withered technology. But it never crashes. It just sears the steak. When you are hungry, you don't want an operating system. You just want the job done without cognitive load.
That concept of cognitive load is the absolute key here. And the text points out that you see this same convenience paradox playing out in modern fashion with Crocs.
Oh, Crocs. Fashion magazines hate them.
They really do. Traditional fashion critics have declared Crocs culturally dead more times than we can count. Objectively, they defy traditional footwear aesthetics.
They look like tiny foam boats.
They do.
Yeah.
But look at the underlying psychology of the people who actually wear them religiously. We're talking about nurses working 12-hour shifts, parents wrestling 2 toddlers out the front door, or, people running out to walk the dog at 6 in the morning.
People who are stressed.
Exactly. These are people experiencing high cognitive load. Crocs offer a zero-friction experience.
You don't have to tie them. You don't have to worry about scuffing them. If you step in a puddle, you literally take a garden hose to them and they are brand new.
Yep.
So being technically worse at traditional footwear design is strategically superior because it completely eliminates the mental friction of wearing shoes.
And this naturally triggers the next phase of a product's life cycle. When a product is that devoid of friction, when the cognitive load is effectively zero, the user feels a profound sense of ownership.
Okay, right.
And when that happens, the creator essentially loses control over how the product is used. The science fiction author William Gibson summed this up beautifully in a quote, "The street finds its own uses for things."
The street finds its own uses because if it's a blank canvas, people will paint whatever they want on it, which is exactly the fate of the Walkman.
Yes, the Walkman again.
Sony executives had convinced themselves it was a niche tool for teenagers to study late at night without waking their parents.
Right, that was the whole pitch.
But once it hit the streets, city dwellers started using it to survive the grinding, claustrophobic monotony of subway commutes. Joggers realized they could soundtrack their morning runs. Teens created their own private musical worlds.
The street hijacked the product. And that organic hijacking is what drove it to sell hundreds of millions of units.
But hold on, let me push back a bit. Let's look at this from the perspective of the creator.
Right.
If you're an executive and your team just spent 3 years and millions of dollars designing a very specific tool for a very specific market, seeing the public hijack it and use it quote-unquote wrong has to feel terrifying. How hard is it for a company to swallow its pride and let the customer hijack their original vision?
Oh, it's incredibly hard. The natural instinct in corporate management is to course-correct the user. But forcing the user back into the box is how companies die.
So you just have to let it happen.
You do. It requires a monumental amount of institutional humility to step back, abandon your ego, and watch how human behavior actually unfolds. Let's look at Shigetaka Kurita's creation of the emoji in 1999.
Oh, this is a great example.
It is a masterclass in this kind of humility. Kurita worked for a Japanese telecom giant called Docomo. He designed emojis simply as basic clip art for their early mobile internet service.
So they weren't meant to be a language?
Not at all. He envisioned them as functional weather symbols or business icons.
Just little graphical signposts to save screen space on those tiny flip phones.
Precisely. But teenagers got their hands on these phones, and they completely hijacked the symbols. Why? Because early text messaging was a harsh, emotionally flat medium.
Yeah, very easily misunderstood.
Right, if you sent a text that said, "I'm fine," the recipient couldn't hear your tone of voice. Were you actually fine or were you furious?
Exactly.
So the teenagers needed a way to signal sarcasm, affection, or anger. They repurposed this telecom clip art to inject emotional resonance into digital text. They organically evolved it into a language.
And Docomo didn't try to stop them. They didn't lock the keyboards to only allow business terms.
No, they didn't. They let it happen. And because they let the street decide, Apple and Google eventually had to adopt emoji palettes into every smartphone on Earth. Kurita's clip art became the fastest-growing language in human history.
That is just wild. We actually see this user hijacking happening right now with TikTok.
Oh, definitely.
The document mentions how it started as an app called Musical.ly, which was explicitly built as a virtual karaoke platform for lip syncing.
Right, just teens lip-syncing to pop songs.
Yeah, but users didn't want to just lip sync. They started posting quick comedy sketches, then chaotic cooking tutorials, then deep dive book reviews. They took a lip syncing app and shattered it into thousands of subcultures like food talk and book talk.
Which are huge now.
Huge. They dictate the New York Times bestseller list. They launch completely unknown authors to stardom.
What's fascinating here is how ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, reacted. When the street found its own use for the app, ByteDance didn't stubbornly alter their algorithm to punish non-music videos.
They didn't try to force people back to lip sync it.
Exactly. They leaned entirely into the chaos. They rebuilt their recommendation engine to simply surface whatever held human attention, regardless of their original business model. When you stop defending your roadmap, your users essentially act as a massive, free research and development department.
But, okay, for users to have the flexibility to hijack a product, the product itself has to be fundamentally simple. If it's too rigid, if it has too many rules, you can't mold it.
Right.
So here's where it gets really interesting. How do you force a design to be that simple?
Though the answer seems to be embracing extreme, almost painful limitations. Think about Shigeru Miyamoto designing the character Donkey Kong in 1985.
Oh, a classic.
Miyamoto was facing a seemingly impossible technical wall. He was tasked with creating a deeply recognizable, expressive hero for this new arcade game. But the hardware restricted him to a 16 by 16 grid of pixels.
16 by 16. That is tiny.
To put that in perspective, a 16 by 16 grid is roughly the size of a postage stamp. It is a microscopic canvas.
You literally do not have enough pixels to draw a human face.
You don't.
No.
So he had to rely on the psychology of visual shorthand. He tackled the problem through aggressive subtraction. How do you draw a head of hair bouncing when your character jumps without the pixels turning into a blurry mess?
You don't. You give the character a bright red hat.
Exactly. How do you convey facial expressions when there is no room to draw a mouth or a nose? You give him a giant oversized mustache that separates the face from the chin.
Oh, yeah.
And how do you stop the character's arms from blending into his torso when he runs? You dress him in bright blue overalls to create a stark color contrast against his shirt.
So Mario's hat, his mustache, his overalls, none of that was born out of some grand artistic vision for an Italian plumber.
Nope, not at all.
They were pure pixel-level problem solving. The extreme constraints didn't ruin the character. The constraints quite literally created one of the most famous cultural icons in history.
Limitations force distinctiveness. We see the exact same mechanic in early social media. Think of Twitter's original 140-character limit.
Oh, right.
That wasn't a philosophical manifesto on brevity. It was just hardware math.
Yeah. The global standard for an SMS text message was 160 characters. They needed 20 characters for the username, which left exactly 140 characters for the thought.
Precisely.
But that math problem accidentally invented a new form of communication. It forced people to distill complex thoughts into digital haikus.
And this raises an important question about how we organize physical spaces, too. You can apply this less is more constraint directly to retail business models.
Like grocery stores.
Yeah, take Trader Joe's. When founder Joe Colombi was building the brand, the convenience store space was dominated by giants like 7-Eleven, and massive mega supermarkets were rising.
Which are huge.
Right. Colombi knew he couldn't win by offering more variety. So he embraced the constraint of a tiny store footprint and offered drastically less.
Because walking into a normal mega supermarket is actually a low-key, traumatic, psychological experience. I mean, you want to buy mustard, and you're confronted with an aisle of 85 different mustards.
It induces what psychologists call the paradox of choice. When presented with too many options, the human brain suffers from severe decision fatigue. It requires way too much cognitive energy to evaluate 85 mustards, so the customer ends up feeling overwhelmed and dissatisfied even if they make a purchase.
I've totally felt that.
Right. So Columbus solved this by taking on the hard work of curation himself. A typical supermarket stocks around 50,000 items. Trader Joe's stocks about 4,000.
They save you from the decision fatigue. They only give you one or two types of mustard.
Exactly. The limitation became the solution. By radically limiting the inventory, he eliminated the customer's decision paralysis. Shopping went from being a taxing cognitive chore to a relaxing experience of discovery.
And it worked.
It did. That artificial constraint transformed Trader Joe's into one of the most profitable grocers per square foot in America.
Okay, but if we know this, if withered technology, extreme constraints, and trusting the chaotic wisdom of the street are the secret ingredients to massive success, I have a huge paradox I want to ask you about.
Let's hear it.
Why is modern Silicon Valley currently in an absolute arms race to stuff an AI chip into my toaster? Why are massive corporations still defaulting to complex feature bloat and obsessing over data and surveys?
Because data feels safe. It gives executives a measurable spreadsheet to point to when things go wrong. But relying entirely on data is a trap.
A trap.
Yes, principle 5 from the text. Data possesses a massive inherent blind spot. It only excels at telling you what customers think about things that already exist. He was famously terrible at predicting how human beings will react to entirely new paradigms.
Right.
Remember, focus groups decisively rejected the concept of the minivan. They rejected the VCR. They completely dismissed the iPhone because it didn't have a physical keyboard.
Which is an incredible segue into an example from the publishing world. So Shueisha, the publisher of the legendary manga magazine Shonen Jump, they run on ruthless reader surveys.
Yes.
Every single week, readers vote on their favorite comics. If the data says your comic ranks poorly, it is swiftly canceled. So in 1984, an artist named Akira Toriyama debuted this weird gag-driven comic, and the early survey data was brutal.
Just terrible numbers.
All the metrics screamed that the comic was a total flop and should be axed immediately.
But Toriyama's editor, Kazuhiko Torishima, he recognized the flaw in the data. The readers were rejecting it because it didn't fit their current comfort zone of what a gag comic should be. But Torishima trusted his gut instinct that Toriyama had a latent, untapped genius for action. He pushed the artist to pivot the failing gag series into a sweeping, high-stakes martial arts epic. That comic became Dragon Ball,
which went on to sell over 300 million volumes. It practically created the modern global anime industry. If they had bowed to the data, Dragon Ball would have been canceled in its first year.
Because data can't measure a market that hasn't been invented yet. We see this in the Western tech sphere with Slack, too.
Oh, the messaging app.
Yeah. Back in 2009, Stuart Butterfield was running a company trying to build an online multiplayer game called Glitch. It was a commercial failure.
Nobody was playing it.
Right. But during development, his team had hacked together a quirky little internal messaging tool just for their own office communication. Butterfield had the radical realization that maybe other companies needed this tool.
But if he had run a market survey, the data would have told him the enterprise messaging market was already completely saturated. You had Microsoft, you had IBM.
The data would have said it was a terrible idea. And he had zero experience in enterprise software. But he ignored the crowded market surveys. He knew his team loved using it, and he bet that other humans at other companies suffered from the same clunky communication friction his team did.
So he just pivoted.
He pivoted a failed video game into an internal chat tool, and in 2021, Salesforce bought Slack for $27.7 billion.
Wow. And this highlights the core difference, right, between serving an existing market and creating an unseen one. Creating a new market means you are fundamentally changing human behavior.
Yes.
And changing behavior requires overcoming massive psychological resistance. Take the invention of karaoke.
Oh, this is a brilliant example of that resistance.
Right. So in 1967, Shigechi Negishi wired an 8-track tape deck to a microphone in his kitchen just because he wanted to hear his own voice over an instrumental track.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, inventing the physical machine was the easy part. Commercializing it was the nightmare because the psychological friction was immense.
Right, because the average person is utterly terrified of singing in public.
Exactly. The innovation wasn't the technology, it was stripping away the social terror. It actually took a rival creator to figure out the psychological hack.
What did he do?
This rival actually started paying bar employees to act as plants.
Wait, really? Paid actors?
Paid actors. These employees would pretend to be regular customers, coaxing each other up to the microphone, singing, and having a great time. They artificially simulated a safe social environment.
Oh, that's smart.
Once real customers watched this and realized the stakes were low, the social terror vanished. They experienced what it felt like to be a star for 3 minutes, and karaoke became a global phenomenon.
They didn't upgrade the microphone, they downgraded the social anxiety.
Perfectly said.
And that perfectly sets up my absolute favorite example in this entire deep dive, because it encapsulates the idea of solving an invisible psychological job without changing the tech at all. Liquid death.
Ah, the punk rock water.
Yes. Back in 2009, an advertising creative named Mike Cesario was hanging out at heavy metal and punk rock concerts, and he noticed this bizarre phenomenon.
Right.
The hardcore musicians on stage were aggressively drinking out of Monster energy cans, but they had secretly dumped the energy drink and filled the cans with tap water.
Well, yeah, because you can't drink 3 energy drinks during a high-energy set without your heart exploding.
Exactly. They desperately needed hydration, but standing on stage at a punk show holding a flimsy, crinkly plastic bottle of Poland Spring completely shattered their hardcore identity.
It ruins the aesthetic.
The water bottle was a source of identity friction. So in 2017, Cesario launched Liquid Death. It is literally just mountain water packaged in a heavy metal aluminum tallboy can with a melting skull on it.
And just imagine presenting that to a focus group.
Oh, they would have hated it.
Every single piece of market data would have laughed him out of the room. They'd say, water comes out of the tap for free. Nobody is going to pay $3 for plain water disguised as beer. This is a product nobody asked for.
Because the data couldn't measure the psychological job that the can was performing. The job wasn't hydration. The job was social signaling.
Exactly.
It was for teenagers who wanted to look edgy at a skate park. It was for a sober person at a raging house party who wanted to hold something that looked like a beer so they wouldn't get interrogated about why they weren't drinking.
He solved the social friction.
He solved the social friction of drinking water by turning the can into social camouflage. And as of 2024, that company selling water in a can is valued at $1.4 billion.
It is the ultimate synthesis of everything we've discussed. Liquid Death didn't invent a new beverage chemistry. They used withered tech water and an aluminum can. They embraced extreme constraints. But they understood human psychology and social friction infinitely better than the data ever did.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground today, from the Walkman and the Game Boy to Crocs, emojis, Trader Joe's, and punk rock water. So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah, how do we apply this?
The overarching secret here, whether you are a massive CEO trying to launch the next big platform or you are just someone trying to organize your own daily habits and workflows, is that true innovation rarely means pushing harder or adding more bells and whistles.
It's not about upgrading everything.
Right. It's almost always about clearing a path. It's about making things incredibly easy, embracing your limitations, and understanding the invisible, deeply human friction that gets in the way of us doing what we actually want to do.
And to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that really pushes this concept into your own life. I want you to consider the tools, apps, or daily habits you've abandoned recently.
Okay.
Did you drop them because they weren't advanced enough? Or did you drop them because they just had too much friction?
That's a great question.
Maybe the next great breakthrough in your own life or work isn't about acquiring an upgrade, but deliberately downgrading to withered technology that simply gets the job done.
That is a wild thought. Deliberately downgrading. Thank you so much for joining us on today's Deep Dive. We hope you walk away looking at the so-called inferior technology in your life with a newfound respect. Because who knows? Maybe the next billion-dollar idea is sitting on a boardroom table right now, looking like a clunky metal tape deck that can't even record. Until next time.